Hello everyone, this is James Shore with another how-to video. I'm recording this on October 2nd, 2015. In this chapter, we're introducing test-driven development of front-end code, and in the last episode, we wrote our first real tests. Unfortunately, it didn't actually work. When we run our tests, it it works on everything except for Chrome and Safari, and mobile Chrome and mobile Safari. And this, once again, is exactly why we have cross-browser testing, because when you do DOM work, it does not behave consistently across browsers. It is a pain in the butt, believe me, but it is just the way of the world with front-end development. So in this episode, what we're going to do is debug this. We're going to figure out what's going wrong. Now, sometimes when you do test-driven development, you can just look at the code you've written and figure it out because there's not a whole lot of it. But in this case, we've got 5 lines of code and any one of these could be wrong, and I don't know which one it is. So let's go ahead and debug. We know everything's working fine in Firefox. So let's go ahead and pull up Safari here, and we'll load up a debug tab and just look at the inspector. What is going on? How come our div element doesn't have the display none property? It's giving us, we're expecting it to, we've created the div and we've initialized it, which should have set our display to none. And then we get the computed style of it out of the element and we check the property of display and we expect that to be none. And it is none on most browsers, but on Safari and Chrome, it's nothing, which is weird because that shouldn't be a valid value. It should either be block or none or inline block, one of the various display options. So quote code is weird. But if we pull it up here, we should be able to see what value it actually has. But it's not in here at all, which is very weird. Let's look at Firefox. We know it works on Firefox. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the debugger and bring up the inspector. And this doesn't have a div either. All right, well, we know it's working on Firefox, so that means that we're doing something in our test that's preventing it from showing up in the DOM. Let's take a look at it. We created, do you see what it is? What are we forgetting in these 4 steps here? We're forgetting to append it to the DOM, and although that seems to work just fine on Firefox, it does not work on Safari. It has no display style when it's not actually part of the DOM. So for this test to work properly, we need to append the div to our document body like this. And I'll bet you that now works. Let's give it a try. Oh yeah, there we go. So there we have it, our first real test passing. Now remember, it's think, red, green, refactor, repeat. We've done the think, we've done the red bar, we've done the green bar. Now it's time to refactor. And we just had, and one of the sources of refactoring, when I'm thinking about our code, the purpose of refactoring is to make the code nicer. And by nicer, I mean cleaner. And by cleaner, I mean, well, what do I mean? I mean making it easier for people to understand what's going on in your code and harder to make mistakes. Well, we've just made a mistake. So whenever I do make a mistake, I look at my code and I say, what about the way this code was designed made that mistake more likely? And what can I do to change the code to make that mistake less likely in the future? I can imagine it being really easy to forget the append child. And that wasn't a setup, by the way. It was a real, genuine error on my part. I just forgot it. And I've been doing this for a long time. So if I can forget it now, I'm going to forget it again. Believe me. So how can I change this code to make it harder for me to forget that in the future? This is the kind of thing you think about when you're refactoring. One thing that we could do is we could create a new function called addElement that did both the creation and the appending and return the result. So if we did that, this would be taken out and put down into a new function, which we'll call, again, addElement. It will take an element and we'll put our code in there. This is the extract method or extract function refactoring once again. And that should work exactly the same way. So let's run the test again. Every time you refactor, small little refactorings, take small steps, run the test afterward, make sure you didn't break anything. And I sure did. It says element is already defined because this, I shouldn't have passed in element here. I should have passed in the tag name. And this will be the tag name. See, again, a genuine mistake. This is not staged. I'm just this error prone. I really am. I make mistakes all the time. The purpose of test-driven development is not to prevent me from making mistakes, because nothing on this earth could prevent me from making mistakes. The purpose of test-driven development is to let me see my mistakes right away. And that's why we care about small steps, because the sooner you catch the mistake, the easier it is to figure out. Notice there, no debugging required. I came in, I figured it out right away. And this hopefully will now pass. Oh, ouch. It did not pass. It says element is undefined on line 6. No, on line 6 of tabs.js. So element is undefined here, which means we're passing in an undefined element, which means that this is not defined, which means that we're not returning it. Did I mention that I make a lot of mistakes? I really do. Let's try that. This time it should pass. And there we go. And that, by the way, is why we take small steps even when we refactor. And it's also why we only refactor when we have a green bar. So there we go. Now this new add element function should make it harder to make this mistake that we've made before, forgetting to append the element. Let's see what else we could refactor. I want to take out the arrange, act, assert comments. Those were just for illustration. We do also need to do the reset. I'll do that in a moment. Now, having taken out those arrange, act, assert comments, that does raise the question of, does this code speak clearly without them? Is it really obvious what's going on here? I don't think it is yet. I think it could be more obvious. And the reason it's not completely obvious is because this code is weird. Get computed style is just, it's a weird DOM API call that a lot of people don't know about. The fact that you have to get the style and then get property value, that's not great either. How can we fix that? Well, if you said extract another function, you would be right, or at least you would have the same answer I do, which is not necessarily the right answer. Refactoring is very subjective. But in my opinion, extract method or extract function and rename variable and rename function are the two most powerful refactorings there are. A lot of making your code readable is about choosing good names, and you won't always choose good names right away. And you will often have things that need to be chunked together to be given one name. Extract function and rename variable are your two main tools for doing that. So let's go ahead and pull this out. We're going to call this, well, what shall we call it? Let's call it get display property for now. And we'll pass in the element and we'll get back the display variable. So we'll get this back and we'll pass element in. Then we'll take this, we'll cut it out and we'll put it in a new function down here. You'll take an element and we'll say, we'll get the styles, we'll get the value, and this time let's remember to return the result. And that should work. That should be a refactoring that didn't change anything. And it does. Now that we've done that, we can do another refactoring. Notice that these are two separate refactorings. We're taking really small steps here where we inline this variable because it's no longer needed. We're only using it once and we're using it immediately on the next line. So really that's a great example of where inline would work well for us. So let's cut this out here and replace it here. And that should also still work. And it does. Okay, what other refactorings can we do? I want you to notice here how we're doing lots of refactorings. This is pretty typical. You'll go through the test-driven development cycle, the TDD cycle several times without doing any refactorings, just because they're really small things. And then at some point you'll make a bigger change and you'll see an opportunity for more refactorings. Well, one thing I see is that we no longer need this, but we do want to do this remove child. So let's go ahead and pull that up, and it will be element.parentNode.removeChild. And that should work. Technically, that's not really refactoring because we didn't have it before, but it should still work. Good. And I think this could be made to be more readable too. I think if we had a remove element function, that would speak a lot more clearly than this does. So let's go ahead and factor this out into that kind of function. And there's no return value in this case, so I think that will work. Let's go ahead and give it a try. Yes. Yep, we are all good. Okay. So there's our arrange, act, assert, reset. Yar. It's perfect. Very good. And I'm going to remove those blank lines because now that there's one line per idea, we really don't need them. All right, before we wrap up, let's take a look at our tabs.js before we move on to the next loop through the cycle. Is there any refactorings we could do here? I mean, this doesn't speak terribly clearly, but I'm pretty sure we're going to make more changes here, so I don't want to make any changes to it yet. We could factor this out into a function that said, I don't know, hide element, and that's potentially a good refactoring. But I don't want to jump the gun. I think as we make more changes to this code, what it needs will be more obvious. This test is pretty much done, so I was happier making refactorings to it. But over here, we're still going to have lots of changes, and it may be that putting in a new function will be the wrong thing for what we need in the future. I could be wrong. We'll see. All right, with that all done, it's time to go through the loop again. Let's go ahead and check all this in first. So we've finished our first front-end test. All right, we're ready to go through the loop again, but we're going to do that in the next episode. I have one more thing I want to share with you in this episode, and that is how to do debugging a little more deeply. Now, hopefully, as you're doing TDD, because you're taking small steps, you won't need to bring up the debugger very often, but sometimes you will. Now that we've added this remove element, though, anytime we load the code in the debugger, we're not going to be able to see any of our DOM elements because, well, they've been removed. One way to work around that is to comment out the remove element and then rerun the test so that that gets loaded by Karma and then reloading it in the debugger. Now you can see that our div is in there and it has the display none style. That's really useful. If you don't feel like doing the commented out trick though, which honestly I typically tend to do, you can also use the debugger. Let me load up that uncommented code so we can see that the div is not there. If you go over to the debugger tab in the Firefox debugger, and there's an equivalent tab on other browsers, and you load up the test that you're working on, tabs test in this case, you can put in a breakpoint by clicking in the left-hand column here. Bam, like that. That's a breakpoint. Now if we run the code by reloading the page, execution will stop when the code gets to the breakpoint. Let me put it a little higher so you can see how this works. So I'll put a breakpoint right here, and then I'll reload to make everything run. When the browser executes JavaScript, it executes it one line at a time. And when it gets to a line that has a breakpoint on it, before it runs that line, it will stop and bring it up in the debugger so you can see what's going on. So now, if we look at the inspector, you can see that the element is not present. But if we go back to the debugger and we say, execute this one line, which we can do by saying step over or step into. In this case, I'm going to say step into. So what it will do is it will say, we've got an add element call here. Step into will say, run the next line that's inside of add element. Step over would say, run the entire add element function and move to the next line up here. So I'm going to say step into. Now we'll see if we do a document.create element. we append it to the body, and we return it. And then when we come out of that, we're ready to move on to the next line. Now if we look at the inspector, that div should be added. And in fact, there it is. It's right there. Back in our debugger, next we're going to call tabs.initialize. That's going to set the display none property. I'm going to step over that. So you're going to see it's not going to go into the tabs function. It's just going to run it and then move right on to the next line. But now that it's run, we should be able to see, yes, display none is here. And continuing on. Once we call remove element, it will have disappeared. So when you're debugging, you can put your breakpoint anywhere you like. In this case, I probably would have put it here at right before remove element is called. Reload. Everything will run except for remove element, and we can now look in the inspector to see that that div is present and display none is also present. To clear your breakpoints, you can just tap them again, or you can come down here, say disable. You can also see your breakpoints listed here, and what we can do is right-click this breakpoint and say remove all breakpoints. Now the details of how this works is going to vary depending on which debugger you're in. This is how Firefox works. It's fairly similar in Safari and Chrome, but the buttons are going to be in different places. Go ahead and play with them and see what you think. I'm going to press play to let it continue running, and there you go. Now once again, often I find it more convenient to just comment out in the test because then I don't have to click little tiny buttons and find the exact right spot to go. But you might find it useful to look in the debugger as well upon occasion. And that is the fundamentals of test-driven development and front-end code. Next time, we're going to start a new chapter about really test driving the tab library. Your exercise for this time, twofold. First, copy along with what we've done here. Finish your first test and make sure it works on all browsers, including Safari and Chrome. Do whatever refactoring you think improves the readability of the code. Personally, I think this is a good one, but use your own judgment on that. Once you've got that done, also spend some time playing around with the debugger. Use the Firefox debugger or another one of your choice. If you're looking for a challenge, go ahead and think about which test is next. Start that loop again and with the think step. What is one small thing we want to add to our tab that will move this project forward? And what test do you need to write in order to force yourself to write that line of code? What test will fail until that line of code and only that line of code is present? That's what we're going to do in the next chapter is test drive the remainder of our tab library. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.